Okay, we're going to get started on this last panel before lunch. There is a panel after lunch on TPS and migration, so I do want to put an ad for that. But I'm delighted that we are able to have this discussion on the Police Purge and Reform Commission in Honduras. Honduras has been a big topic. There's been a lot of conflict in the city in Honduras lately, and the report that David Dye will present and introduce is online, and so we are delighted to have him here to present as well. I want to introduce my good friend and colleague for many years, Adriana Beltran, who is the Senior Associate for Central America and Citizen Security at the Washington Office on Latin America. She has published herself a great deal on police in Central America, on citizen security, so she's a real expert, and we're delighted to have her here, and she will moderate this panel. So thank you, Adriana. Adelante.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everybody, for sticking around for this third and important panel on the experience of police reform and cleanup of the police in Honduras. For anyone who follows Honduras and Central America, I would say the Northern Triangle, the enormous problems and challenges confronting police forces are not surprising. Challenges, as we heard, that include weak investigative capacity, weak leadership, high rates of impunity, low public trust, and allegations of corruption, human rights violations, and abuses. And in fact, it was allegations of corruption at the highest level of the Honduran civilian police that led to the creation back in 2016 of the Purge Commission. Creating professional, accountable, and rights-respecting police forces is a critical component to Honduras, but I would say also to Guatemala and El Salvador, and the government's ability to effectively address and improve the security conditions that we heard about earlier. However, as we also heard, it is not the only component. As has been highlighted and stressed in the previous panels, improving security conditions, governance, and the rule of law requires that priority be given to strengthening the institutions, and the police is just one of them. Tackling corruption, as we heard in the previous panel, is also critical to improving the lives and justice and security conditions in the region. Progress on many of these issues will not be possible until, if the institutions remain corrupt, distrusted by the public, and ineffective. And with that, as I said, it doesn't include just the police, but the courts, the public prosecutor's office, and other key institutions. So with that in mind, we will focus right now on the experience of the Honduran police, on the experience and the work of the Purge Commission in trying to clean up the police and reform the police. We will first hear from David Dye. As Eric mentioned, David just published a report, a very thorough report, which I encourage everybody to read, on the experience of the commission, what was the progress achieved to date, some of the challenges, and the question of sustainability. How do we ensure that progress remains and continues? We will then hear from my good friend Omar Rivera. Omar is the coordinator of political advocacy for the Association for a Just Society, SJ, which is the Honduran branch of Transparency International. But in 2016, Omar was appointed by the president to serve in the Purge Commission. So he is here in that capacity to share that experience. So without further ado, I will let David start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Adriana, for your introduction. Much appreciated. I want to start, first of all, by thanking the Wilson Center for entrusting me with the task of researching and writing the report that you now have available. Police Reform in Honduras, the role of the Special Purge and Transformation Commission. I also want to express special thanks to the person who has been my mentor and colleague throughout this endeavor, who is Mr. Eric Olson, formerly the Associate Director of the Latin American Program at the Center, now with the Seattle International Foundation. Eric is out there in the audience, perhaps somewhere. There he is. He will be chiming in later on with choice comments. Okay, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today to present the results of our work, and thank you all for coming. Okay, to recall why we are here discussing this topic today. In April 2016, Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez appointed a special commission with important representation from civil society organizations to purge the Honduran National Police, a force that in prior years had developed the reputation for being notoriously corrupt, penetrated by drug traffickers and organized criminal elements generally, and one of the least effective police institutions in Latin America. The purge that ensued drew significant international media attention due to a number of reasons. First of all, unlike many police purges, it was done from the top down. It moved at an unexpectedly rapid pace and eventually took on an impressive scale, all of which attracted the interest, among others, of the Woodrow Wilson Center, which has on several occasions invited the commissioners to come here to this forum to expound on their achievements and plans. Okay, so the report you have before you is, in a sense, a direct outgrowth of the center's interest in this issue and more generally in Honduras and security issues in other countries of the Northern Triangle. Okay, what have we tried to do with this report? To begin with, I want to stress that the objectives of the report are relatively modest. That statement might seem to be belied by the length of the document, which is excessive. However, I can attest that this is due more to the author's long-windedness than to any vaulting ambition. What I mean to say by this is that the project was not designed to be either a deep historical examination of events and was in no sense to be a full-scale or systematic evaluation of the purge and transformation process. Okay, either of those goals would have involved a much larger commitment of time and resources than was available, and would have resulted in a manuscript that would really have tried your patience. The report should be seen then, at best, as a first approximation to such a history and such an evaluation, and an input into future research, further research by anyone interested in the topic. Okay. In short, the report's pretensions are basically descriptive and analytical and encompass four major objectives, three of which will frame my remarks today. All right. First objective of the report has been to tell a fuller story than has been told to date about what the process of cleansing and transforming the HNP, I will use that initial, consisted of and how it was conducted, and review its initial results. Okay, this is necessarily a story told in large part from the perspective of the Special Commission itself, as the members and staff are the principal primary sources of information about it. At this point, I want to take the opportunity to thank personally all the members of the Special Commission and all their advisors, including Commissioner Rivera, who is with us today, for their collaboration with the report. Without their collaboration, the report that you now have would not exist. By the same token, I also want to extend appreciation to the president and staff of the Association for a More Just Society, ASJ, which is a civil society organization that has played a key supporting role in the Commission's endeavors and which has also been very generous in providing me with insight into the process. Okay. Now, today, given the length of the report and the brief time we have available, I'm not going to try to summarize the purge and transformation process. However, there's one thing about it I would like to highlight at the outset, and that is the fact that the legal mandate of the Special Commission was relatively limited. And the process was one in which the Commission did not have full administrative or political control. Okay. That meant that the outcomes, both of the purge and structural changes that followed, have resulted from a complex process of bargaining. The bargaining involved the civil society actors on the Commission, the Minister of Security, or the Security Ministry, which was represented on the Commission by General Julian Pacheco, the minister, the police itself, the Honduran Congress, other state institutions, and finally President Hernandez. The report does not do justice to all of the interactions among these actors, and which really deserve a deeper treatment. The point to underscore, however, is that inevitably this bargaining led to compromises. Certain goals were achieved, others were not. Others are still pending, all of which is entirely normal and expectable, except to people who are expecting miracles. Okay. Regarding the results of the purge and transformation process, let me just mention a few highlights to convey the basics of what was accomplished to those who are unfamiliar with the subject. Purge of the HNP can be summarized in 4 basic numbers. In a matter of weeks, it removed the great bulk of the top leadership of the institution. To be exact, 2/3 of all first and second rank officials, who numbered about 56. Over a period of 2 years, it removed more than 5,000 total personnel from the institution, which is about 35% of the initial number. That cleansing opened the way in January of 2018 for the appointment of a new police leadership in which the turnover was almost complete, i.e., most of the people in the 17 top jobs in the force, now we're talking about posts and not ranks, were replaced. And were replaced mainly by people who at the beginning of the purge had been third-ranking officials in the force. These numbers are, in comparative context, impressive, and are a gauge of the opportunity that was generated by the purge for making changes in institutional structures and behavior. Okay, in other words, the purge was large enough to open the door for a thorough transformation of the institution, although obviously it could not guarantee it. Okay. With regard to the legal and institutional changes promoted by the Special Commission, I would highlight the following. Special Commission was instrumental in redrafting and lobbying for the passage in 2017 of a new organic law of the National Police and the Security Ministry. This legislation has contributed to revamping a police organizational structure, which had become deformed by criminal penetration, and allows, in theory, for strong civilian control over an institution that, in the worst years of the Honduran security crisis, which were 2011 and 2012, was for all practical purposes out of control. That control is supposed to be buttressed by a new supervisory and disciplinary apparatus, which is known by the acronym DIDADPOL, which has been a special focus of the Commission's attention. Among other goals, both of these reforms have been designed to prevent the repenetration of the HNP by criminal elements. Okay. In addition, complementing these changes, a modern merit-based police career law is now in place, one of whose novelties is for the first time that officers who fail to ascend in rank after several trials have to leave the force and make way for others who are presumably more competent. Both of the new laws then contribute to a second major goal, which is to professionalize the force and upgrade its capabilities. Okay. Finally, legal and supervisory measures promoted by the Special Commission incorporated and built on certain other changes that had already begun before the Commission was established. One of these is the reform of the police education system, an endeavor in which the Inter-American Development Bank and COSUDE, the Swiss Cooperation Agency, have played major roles. That process has raised the educational and skill levels of police recruits. At the same time, it has attempted to change the police culture in an attempt to instill respect for human rights and to promote engagement with community residents. The other area is the adoption of community policing practices, which have since early 2016, before the purge began, officially been the HNP's model policing strategy. Okay, those practices are the attempt to spread those practices is aimed both at gaining the trust of the citizens and improving intelligence gathering on the ground. Okay, what does this summary indicate? The total package of changes encompassed by the reform is sweeping. That is to say, in a short span of time, transformation accompanying the purge has attempted to change the leadership, organizational structures, career patterns, education and training, and policing practices. The 4 underlying objectives to repeat are prevent the repenetration of the force by criminal elements, to professionalize the force, making it more effective in everything that it does, forge a new police culture of human rights and respect for the citizens, and 4th, institutionalize civil society oversight of the reform process itself. Okay. So these objectives then provide goalposts, so to speak, for specific efforts to evaluate rigorously the outcomes of the Special Commission's work. To repeat, it was not an aspiration of the Wilson Center or the author to make those evaluations in this report. Okay. Now, if all of that is clear, let me go on to the second major objective of this report, which is to situate the story of the purge and transformation process in its political context. Now, here it is necessary to understand how the opportunity to do the purge and the subsequent institutional changes came about, how it was possible for certain civil society leaders to exploit that opportunity and foment change, and how it was possible for them to make significant progress in a country, Honduras, which had hitherto seemed extremely hostile to police reform efforts. So the political story behind the purge is peculiar. It is intriguing. To some in Honduras, I'm sure it probably seems far-fetched, and has dimensions which the report has surely not been able to tap fully. But in any case, understanding it involves, first of all, situating the purge episode within the vicissitudes of President Hernandez's political project, including his controversial re-election bid in December 2017. Okay. These bear in particular on how and why the process began. In effect, the report argues that there are 3 causal factors pushing the process forward, and 1 facilitating factor that created room for it to happen. And the distinction between those 2 things is important. All right, what were they? Take into consideration first that the political vulnerability of President Hernandez in early 2016. Over a period of several years, Hernandez had been thrown on the defensive by multiple charges of corruption and had to accept the installation of the OAS anti-corruption mission known as the MOXIE. Then, in April 2016, national and international press made explosive revelations that his highest-ranking police generals were not only engaged in drug trafficking, but had been plotted the murder of 2 leading anti-drug officials of the Honduran state. To control the damage from these revelations, the president immediately names a special commission, charges it with reforming the police, and packs it with civic organizations, which he undoubtedly thought would do his bidding and limit any changes to a level that would not pose him any particular political threat. Okay, that decision started the process rolling. However, Hernandez apparently did not anticipate that the leaders of those organizations would exploit his vulnerabilities and do something he was not expecting. In fact, commission members from the Association for a More Just Society, including Omar, and the Evangelical Confraternity, refused to do the government's bidding, insisted on doing a fuller, a deeper, and lightening purge, and levered the government into an accommodation. Making a long story short, with this bold initiative, they built political support for their actions and parlayed that support into an expansion of their mandate, carving out space to contribute not just to cleansing the HNP's personnel, but to contribute to structural change of the institution. In short, determined civil society actors saw an opening, exploited it, and exerted the leadership that pushed reform forward. Okay. In this initiative, however, the non-state commissioners on the Special Commission were not alone, but enjoyed support from important international actors, especially the U.S. government. The United States was Juan Orlando Hernandez's strongest international ally, and the clear message from the U.S. to him was that support for a thorough purge of the HNP was vital for their relationship. Now, the effect of that message cannot be conclusively demonstrated, obviously, but the fact remains that the president quickly changed course and publicly got behind a thorough purge as something that, although it involved certain risks to his position, could also be turned to his advantage. He could win him points in Washington, where decisions about aid were pending, and in Honduras, where he was about to launch his re-election bid. So, 3 factors: Hernandez's political weakness, civil society initiative, and international support gave the purge its push. However, I would argue that all of that would not have been sufficient were it not for another feature of the political context in Honduras that facilitated Hernandez's decision to accept the risks involved in doing a major purge. That feature is the broader national and citizen security framework which the Hernandez government had been developing since 2012. Now, as a feature of that framework, as some of you may know, Honduras now has 2 police forces, not 1. The HNP and a smaller military public order police, which was created in 2013. The first institution has undergone reform, the second has not. This distinction has to be kept in mind whenever you read news reports from Honduras about government reactions to demonstrations and protests. That is to say, one has to be careful to ask which police force is acting, and also anticipate that the 2 of them may be acting in coordination, making it important to distinguish which of the 2 bodies is doing what. Complicating matters further, certain police functions, which in other countries are centralized in a single national police body, in Honduras are located in other parts of the executive and judicial branches of state, notably in a national intelligence apparatus and also in the public ministry. In other words, Honduras, in a sense, has an overarching police model that extends beyond the confines of the HNP. I emphasized that at the beginning because our report is only about the HNP. It's not about the larger model, which touches on other parts of that model only tangentially. But why is this relevant? In addition to the pressures that caused Hernandez to change course, I would argue that his acceptance of a deeper purge was facilitated by the fact that the rest of that model, as well as other institutions of the Honduran state, remained under his full or at least substantial control. That fact limited the risks to his position that might be entailed by doing a thorough cleansing of the national police. That cleansing could threaten inevitably some loss of political control, but he could afford to take that risk, safe in the knowledge that, among other safeguards, he had the military police to come to his rescue if the population turned against him, as it did after his re-election in 2017. In other words, the existence of a larger police model then was arguably a precondition for reform of the HNP, both to begin and to reach its present state of fruition. In some circumstances, however, it could become a source of vulnerability and a threat to sustainability. Okay. What is the foregoing argument then? Is effectively that the political correlation of forces in which the purge and transformation process began in 2016 contributed to its successes. However, the balance of forces was by no means one-sided. By agreeing to serve, the civil society members on the Special Commission had to accept legal, financial, political, and administrative constraints that were set by the Honduran state as their operative framework. Inevitably, those constraints created limitations, forcing the bargaining process to which I referred at the start. And they conditioned the depth and ramifications of the purge and the institutional restructuring. Those limitations are also the source of a number of key questions that other groups in Honduran society have asked about the purge right from the beginning. For example, did the purge of the HNP remove all of the corrupt officials, even at the highest levels? In all probability, no. Nor is it likely that any purge has ever done that. Even with significant U.S. help, the Commission could not command the information it needed from the institutions of the Honduran state to identify and expel absolutely all of the rotten apples from the barrel. The judgment of the report is then that the purge process and circumstances were not foolproof. Big fish could have made it through the Commission's sieves, although the report does not conclude definitively that that occurred. Okay. Another question was, well, did the purge lead to major criminal elements from the HNP being brought to justice? Here, the answer is clearly, definitively no, very few, in fact, unless there has been recent progress of which I'm unaware. The outstanding issue here is the degree of collaboration or alternatively obstruction of the Special Commission's work by the Honduran Public Ministry or Attorney General. Public Ministry was not an object of an investigation in this report, so we don't claim to say the last word about its relationships with the Commission. But the overall thrust of the evidence is that the Public Ministry offered only limited collaboration with the work of the purge and dragged its feet in investigating and prosecuting hundreds of HMP officers whose names were remanded to it by the Commission, which included many high-ranking HMP officials, some with absolutely notorious reputations. Okay, one could go on with this list for a while, but all the points are relevant essentially to the third major objective of our report, which is to provide a perspective, again, not a systematic analysis, on the issue of the sustainability of the reform. Some of you in the audience may be experts in police reform, which I'm not. This is my first foray into the topic. But in any case, all of you know, or are probably keenly aware, that police reform is an inherently difficult endeavor which is often subverted and reversed. This has been obvious in El Salvador and Guatemala, countries which Adriana and her colleagues at WOLA have studied now intensively for decades. So that in that comparative context, our report's provisional conclusion about the HNP, that its prospects for its consolidation as a decriminalized and professional police body are guarded, quote unquote, is neither terribly original or terribly robust. More important than the conclusion is a discussion of the factors impinging on that consolidation, of which I want to mention just a few. Do the limitations I referred to a moment ago mean that reform of the Honduran National Police is doomed to failure and that the institution is destined to fall victim to recriminalization or to be used for political purposes by the government of the day? Now, there are those in Honduras, people with broad knowledge of past failures of reform efforts and very conscious of how deep the criminal penetration of the police has been, who would say no, definitely not. Being somewhat more optimistic, I would reply, well, not necessarily. But I would have to acknowledge that consolidating the reform will be difficult and is by no means assured. The key here is not, however, whether all of the corrupt elements in the institution have been thrown out, but whether the reformed institution and leadership are strong enough to keep those elements in check and go on to consolidate a process of professionalization and engagement with the citizenry. Are they strong enough? At this point, it's too early to tell. Possibly yes and possibly no. But the report makes a number of observations about factors bearing on the question. Okay. Now, I won't have time to review all of these, but I will select out 3 interrelated factors in the HNP's case that will impinge in an important way on the consolidation of the reform and are the sources of the most important vulnerabilities. Discussion of these is timely at the moment because recent events, inclusive of the last few weeks, have suggest that these factors are changing and changing to the potential detriment of progress in the reform. Okay, first, it is a commonplace in literature about police reform to argue that success depends greatly on continuity in overall public security policy. Okay. Such continuity has arguably existed under President Hernandez since 2012, but in a peculiar form. During this period, reform of the national police has occurred within a broader security framework, which I mentioned, in which the president has met many of his needs for political protection in ways that don't necessarily require or unduly compromise the HMP itself. For example, he gave the military public order police the leading role in putting down the demonstrations against his questioned re-election in late 2017. In that episode, the purged and partially reformed and national police played a secondary role in controlling the crowds and were blamed for only one of the 23 fatalities that occurred during weeks of violent conflict. More generally, there is evidence to suggest that, at least prior to this point, President Hernandez has refrained from involving the national police, at least in urban areas, too heavily in repressive tasks that would hinder its quest for relegitimation or suggest that reform of the institution had failed. However, this is a situation that could change. What if a President Hernandez, under political threat, were to lose his ring of protection and had to turn to the HNP to conduct wholesale repression? This question, which until recently has seemed to be somewhat academic, is relevant actually to the events of the last few weeks, in which the president is once again under siege from demonstrators, demonstrating teachers, doctors, transport workers, and others. In fact, unconfirmed rumors have spread that both the Honduran military and military police have, on this occasion, refused to go out in the street and control the demonstrators. That situation, then, has allegedly placed the reformed national police, for the first time, in the position of having to do the work of controlling mass protests all by themselves. Okay, controlling protests is one of the politically most sensitive tasks that any police force anywhere has to do. How well has the national police conducted itself? Well, hopefully the UN High Commission for Human Rights will do a thorough investigation of this matter, as it did after the 2017 election. From my limited information, what I would say is that the HNP has given the impression that in this episode that it has been reluctant to use excessive force against the populace. 3 or 4 deaths have occurred during the protests, none of which has been yet definitively attributed to the HNP. In fact, overworked units of the special forces of the HNP themselves briefly went on strike last Thursday. Okay, how to interpret this behavior remains to be clarified, but in any case, President Hernandez appears to be emerging from this episode of political conflict in a weaker position than before. That makes the prospect for a change of government in 2021, or in some speculations earlier, more likely. And the government that replaces him could conceivably be one that does not share his international alliances and does not feel committed to maintaining the current police reform effort. In sum, policy continuity in which the national police reform has been nurtured so far may be in jeopardy. A second factor bearing on reform sustainability is continuity in international support, which has been very strong to date, but which is now threatening also to wane. Since 2014, the U.S. government has been involved in strengthening most of the major components of the national police. It has also conducted very widespread human rights vetting of HNP personnel, numbering in the thousands per year. In other words, the scale and breadth of U.S. efforts with the national police have sent a message to the whole of the institution that reform is here to stay. However, all of these efforts have to be sustained. President Trump's lamentable decision to cut back most U.S. assistance to Honduras is unfortunately a potentially serious blow to the continuity of that reform. I understand that there may be a small carve-out, so to speak, allowing some forms of security assistance to the national police to continue. However, from what I understand, and Omar and Adriana may have more information than I do. The budget for the INL, the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Branch, will apparently be cut to about a quarter of its previous size. That means that the Bureau is going to have to make tough decisions about to prioritize the rest of its funds. At the same time, funds for USAID violence prevention programs are likely to disappear, which makes one wonder whether support for community policing will also fall by the wayside. Okay, in sum, the overall contours of the new U.S. policy toward Honduras suggest that what has to date been a very strong commitment to see the police reform process through is likely to be significantly and perhaps severely curtailed. Okay. Third, this collapse or radical curtailment of foreign support for Honduras police reform could then affect a third factor bearing on the sustainability equation, which is the institutional leadership's own commitment to reform. Now, the new police leaders that were chosen in early 2018 offer a ray of hope. Below the level of the three top posts, you have a younger cohort or generation of more highly educated and technologically more sophisticated officers now occupying the rest of the high-level positions. However, all of these are not equally committed to the reform, undoubtedly. In addition, by virtue of the new organic law, police division heads are very strongly subordinated to the security minister, who controls most of the appointments and promotions. So that if political signals they receive from above change, their behavior is likely to change also. At the very least, the degree to which they have bought into the reform could, in these circumstances, be put to a serious test. Okay, what does this line of reasoning suggest? In sum, it suggests that consolidation of the HNP reform is particularly vulnerable to changes in the constellation of political elements that gave rise to the purge process in 2016. In current circumstances, some of which have changed in these current circumstances. As a matter of fact, they have changed since the report was completed. All of this then raises doubts about whether progress toward reform goals will continue. Okay. That possibility underscores the need for civil society organizations to continue to exercise vigilance over the reform process and indeed the whole police model. With that last observation, I will conclude, pass the baton to Omar, and await your reactions. Thank you.
Omar.
Muy buenas tardes a todos, a todas. Muy contento de estar aquí en este conversatorio. He apuntado algunas cosas que creo que es importante subrayar, más que agregar algo a lo que David hoy nos ha expuesto. En primer lugar, yo creo que es importante que ustedes sepan que cuando nosotros llegamos encontramos una policía que tenía tres características. Primero, era una policía con una mística castrense. Es decir, los distintos oficiales que dirigían la Policía Nacional. Creo que hay un problema.
Sorry, ya. No era yo.
Tenía tres características la policía. Primero, era una policía de mística castrense. Toda la cúpula policial se había formado en la escuela militar. Recuerden ustedes que antes de que esta policía civil hubiese sido creada, hace unas 2 décadas, era una fuerza de la Fuerza Armada. Entonces, era castrense. Segundo, generalizadamente corrupta, es decir, en todos los niveles, al nivel de la alta oficialidad, del mando intermedio y de la base, una apuesta importante a la ejecutoria de actos corruptos para beneficio particular. Y en tercer lugar, algo que en primera instancia nosotros que habíamos auditado la Policía Nacional no la advertíamos como un problema grave. Era ineficiente e incapaz. Tenemos una policía militarizada, corrupta e incapaz. 3 retos que se constituyeron como importantes para poder enfrentar. Y difícilmente alguno de ellos fácil de poder revertir en el corto tiempo que tenemos de desempeñarnos como comisión especial. Una comisión de ciudadanos que enfrentamos un reto mayúsculo. ¿Cómo empezábamos entonces? En Honduras, hasta hace poco, 4% de los delitos cometidos terminan en juicio oral y público y con sentencia condenatoria, con una mora judicial que asfixia totalmente tanto al Ministerio Público como a los tribunales. Los juicios duran en promedio 24 a 30 meses. Si nos íbamos por la vía del proceso judicial, imagínense usted, la certidumbre de poder castigar a un policía era del 4%. 96% de posibilidades de no poder concluir eso en un castigo. Y en segundo lugar nos iba a tomar por lo menos entre 2 años y medio y 3 años. Entonces tuvimos que tomar una decisión pragmática para poder enfrentar una situación que era un riesgo viviente para todos los hondureños. Fuimos pragmáticos en encontrar una forma de quitarles el uniforme, de quitarles el arma de reglamento, de quitarles la autoridad con la cual delinquían los policías. Es decir, evitar que pudieran instrumentalizar la patrulla, evitar que pudiesen instrumentalizar la información que tenían a su disposición para ejecutar actos al margen de la ley. Entonces, una manera de poderlo hacer era consolidar la información que teníamos para que por la vía de más práctica poderlo excluir del sistema policial. Es decir, podríamos tener enfrente un narcotraficante, podríamos tener enfrente un asesino, podríamos tener enfrente un extorsionador, pero si su prueba toxicológica indicaba que consumía droga, se tenía que ir inmediatamente por esa causa. Si la prueba que teníamos a la mano era que por incongruencia patrimonial él no podía seguir en la policía, pues se tenía que ir por esa razón. O si el conjunto de información que recopilamos nos indicaba que era una persona no idónea para seguir en el servicio policial, en primera instancia teníamos que excluirlo de la estructura policial. Entonces, tomando en cuenta que la policía funcionaba como una especie de archipiélago, en donde existía una serie de islotes que funcionaban como una especie de feudo, en donde el general o el comisionado que estaba a cargo de esa unidad era el mandamás, quisimos recopilar y consolidar esa información, porque habían archivos dispersos. Mucha gente se podía constituir en un delincuente en la dirección de tránsito y pasaba de la dirección de tránsito a frontera con su expediente blanco y volvía a empezar la carrera criminal sin ningún tipo de consecuencia. Lo que hicimos fue consolidar la información que a lo largo de los años había estado dispersa y había generado impunidad para poder generar un expediente que pudiese servir de punto de partida para tomar decisiones. Recopilamos información de las distintas unidades y direcciones policiales, dirección de inspectoría, dirección de recursos humanos, de la dirección de inteligencia policial, de la dirección policial de investigaciones, del Ministerio Público como fuente externa, de la Procuraduría General de la República, del Tribunal de Cuentas, del Comisionado Nacional de los Derechos Humanos, del Servicio de Tributación, del Poder Judicial, de las distintas fiscalías especializadas del Ministerio Público, de la Fiscalía de Derechos Humanos, de la Fiscalía contra la Corrupción. Solicitamos información al Departamento de Estado, particularmente a las agencias que tienen presencia en Honduras, y consolidando esa información fue fácil tomar algunas decisiones que excluyeron a 6,000 policías de los 13,000 que nosotros encontramos. Hay mucha gente que indica que nosotros escogimos a unos y a otros de la alta oficialidad. Lo dijo David. 2/3 del liderazgo fue excluido de inmediato de la estructura policial. De los 9 generales, 6 fueron destituidos en los primeros 3 meses. A lo largo del primer año, los restantes 3. No quedó ninguna, o sea, cortamos por lo sano. El actual director de la policía era el número 51 más antiguo, de mayor rango y de mayor experiencia. Los primeros 50 se fueron. Y es que habían ejecutado acto ilícito o lo habían permitido. Es que formaban parte de quienes habían construido aquello que tanto la gente rechazaba. Y utilizamos varias figuras para poderlos excluir. Por justa causa o despido, en el marco del debido proceso, por reestructuración. Hubo dependencias como la Dirección Nacional de Investigación Criminal o la Dirección de Asuntos Legales, en donde la putrefacción era tan grande que tuvimos que cancelar el establecimiento. Simple y llanamente, lo cancelamos. En el marco de la legislación hondureña, cuando usted cancela un establecimiento, cuando usted cierra una dependencia, cuando usted reestructura, únicamente tiene la responsabilidad de pagar la indemnización. Y lo tuvimos que hacer así, empezar de nuevo, de cero. Era la única opción que teníamos. Surgieron muchos cuestionamientos y dijeron, pero es que van a la calle, pero es que eso es una especie de impunidad terciopelada. De alguna manera, los están sacando de la policía, pero van a ir a delinquir a la calle. Pero van a ir a delinquir sin uniforme, sin estructura, sin las armas de reglamento, sin la información que les daba más poder. Eso que trajo como consecuencia, que muchos de ellos quedaron en total indefensión. Y muchos otros, como consecuencia de las acciones, están hoy procesados y muchos extraditados aquí confesando que fueron narcotraficantes. 6,000 policías fueron excluidos, muchos de ellos por la vía administrativa. Otros, los que no eran delincuentes, llegamos a descubrir que tenían serios problemas. Cerca de 600 tenían más de 65 años de edad y prestaban servicio comunitario. Era una injusticia para la población como para ellos. Merecían una jubilación, no estar prestando ahí un servicio para el cual lamentablemente no tenían las capacidades. Otros tenían múltiples problemas físicos, tenían diabetes, una enorme cantidad fueron descubiertos con sobrepeso, con diabetes, con problemas de casi ceguera y fueron también excluidos. De tal manera que pudimos estructurar nosotros un mecanismo para que por la vía de cometer delitos, falta grave o por no tener idoneidad, fueran excluidos de la estructura policial. Hicimos una revisión importante, encontramos 2,100 expedientes, 2,100 expedientes de la supuesta comisión de un delito. No éramos jueces, no éramos fiscales, no somos investigadores criminales y lo que la comisión hizo fue remitir al Ministerio Público para que pudiera ejecutar una acción. Como dice el consultor de este informe, si bien es cierto no hemos recibido una respuesta tan efectiva por parte del sistema, por lo menos tuvimos la oportunidad de recibir una respuesta concreta del nombramiento de una unidad especial para darle seguimiento a todos esos casos, muchos de los cuales, especialmente los más emblemáticos, han sido procesados, y no precisamente el asesino por haber disparado, o el secuestrador o el extorsionador. Después de 2 décadas de impunidad era difícil reconstruir muchos de los expedientes, pero la mayoría de ellos, por lavado de activos y enriquecimiento ilícito, han sido procesados, no pudiendo justificar de manera legal de dónde proviene su fortuna. Y es que era claro, porque el origen de ese patrimonio, mucho de ello era consecuencia de actos al margen de la ley. Finalizo diciendo que a la par del proceso de profilaxis dentro de la policía, se impulsó una acción, como muy bien lo dice David, de reforma institucional. Un nuevo marco jurídico, una ley orgánica de la policía, una ley de la carrera policial, una nueva estructura más eficiente, más armonizada, menos dispersa, destruimos aquel archipiélago que existía y le limitamos la capacidad a aquellos señores feudales que tenían en cada unidad de la policía una extensión de su patrimonio particular. Impulsamos también la reforma al sistema educativo, empezando por el sistema educativo de la escala básica y avanzando ahora a la Academia Nacional de Policía para reformar el sistema superior. Y hemos implementado acciones para mejorar algunos servicios transversales que son fundamentales dentro de la policía. Servicios administrativos, servicios financieros, servicios logísticos, administración de recursos humanos. La policía tiene 18,000 hombres hoy, 6,000 millones de lempiras. ¿Qué empresa en Honduras tiene 18,000 hombres? 18,000 empleados. ¿Quién maneja 6,000 millones de lempiras? Se requieren altos niveles de competencia y ahí hemos hecho un esfuerzo importante. Ahora bien, ¿qué elementos fueron indispensables para esto y con esto culmino? Primero, voluntad política. No hay duda que al margen de las razones por las cuales este proceso fue implementado por la Presidencia de la República, debemos reconocer que por lo menos en la comisión no recibimos nunca presión alguna o direccionamiento en función de nuestro esfuerzo. Segundo, asistencia técnica externa de la cooperación internacional y de organizaciones de la sociedad civil. ASJ, que funcionó como secretario técnico de la comisión especial, aportó recurso valioso, tanto presupuestario como de apoyo en cada uno de los procesos que implementamos. Apoyo político por parte de la cooperación internacional, particularmente de los Estados Unidos de América. Y participación ciudadana, que sin duda algunas fue fundamental, con la integración de las organizaciones no gubernamentales dentro de la comisión como de la iglesia, a sabiendas que esto iba a tener dos consecuencias. Primero, para la sociedad civil, un daño reputacional presupuestado. Sabíamos que al involucrarnos en este proceso la íbamos a pagar caro como consecuencia del cuestionamiento que automáticamente íbamos a tener por parte de mucho opositor al gobierno. Sin embargo, estábamos convencidos que valía la pena pagar ese daño. Y en segundo lugar, el riesgo personal. Riesgo personal que inclusive generó un atentado criminal en contra de uno de nuestros miembros de la comisión, que hoy está exiliado aquí en los Estados Unidos. Fueron a su casa, dispararon, asesinaron a uno de sus escoltas, a otro de ellos le pegaron 5 disparos en su cuerpo, y ese riesgo extraordinario al que fuimos sometidos fue un elemento que también habíamos presupuestado. Culmino diciendo lo siguiente. Este proceso de depuración de la policía no es suficiente para garantizar una modificación total en la situación de inseguridad que existe en el país. Existe un sistema en donde hay 4 instituciones que funcionan como 4 pilares de una mesa, como 4 patas de una mesa. Las Fuerzas Armadas, el Ministerio Público, el Poder Judicial y la Policía Nacional. Estos procesos de depuración, de transformación y de fortalecimiento institucional, si no aplican a todas estas entidades, va a ser bien difícil. Y yo creo que hay que estar consciente que es fundamental presionar para que también ahí se implemente la reforma. Y por el otro lado, tener paciencia, porque lo que se descompuso en 20 años difícilmente se va a poder recomponer en 36 meses que lleva la comisión de ejecutar una acción colaborando con las instituciones del Estado para tener una policía que sea honesta y eficaz.
Gracias, Omar. Thank you, David. We only have a little bit of time. I don't want to go too much over, so because I'm sure everybody's eager to have lunch. So I'll open it up for questions. But just to say, you know, David, you mentioned the number of factors that could make the consolidation of this process vulnerable. But as somebody that has studied police reform in the region, I just want to recognize the important progress that the commission was able to make, because there were past processes and attempts at reforming the Honduran police. And I do think it's important to recognize the progress that the commission has made. But with that, I want to open it up for questions. I'm going to take a round. Please raise your hand so I can see you, gentlemen over here. And then we'll move. I'm going to take 3, and then we'll do another round.
Okay.
If we
Buenas
have
tardes.
time. Probably not.
Buenas tardes, gracias Juan Carlos Montoya, un preocupado hondureño viviendo aquí en Washington. Un par de consultas. ¿Hay alguna métrica post-depuración que lleven de datos sobre que les permita evaluar el éxito o no de las acciones tomadas durante la depuración? Porque pues el reporte dice mucho, también dice poco, es ambivalente, no hay, digamos, es ambiguo, éxitos a media, procesos a medias, etcétera, ¿verdad? Y la consulta es porque al margen de del esfuerzo y los logros que se hayan podido hacer, en 36 meses la percepción, mi percepción al menos, sé que muchos la comparten, es que tenemos una policía que está aún más alejada de la población. Tenemos inclusive una policía que está degradada ante una nueva policía militar de orden público. Pasó a ser, posiblemente se purgó, pero pasó a un segundo escalón en donde le dejaron labores mucho más básicas comparadas a las que tenía antes, ¿verdad? Entonces, y a la vez, digamos, muy baja aplicación de la ley, hay muchísima corrupción, en fin, entonces estos 3, 4, 5 pilares de los que tanto se habló parecen que estamos igual o inclusive peor, ¿verdad? Entonces, ¿cuáles son esas métricas, si acaso existen? Tal vez es un tema que en un reporte se deba presentar o algo, porque no vamos a entrar en análisis de datos ahorita, pero sí es importante saber si existen datos duros mediante el cual se está evaluando o no el éxito de esa depuración, que para muchos, lamento decir, también pensaban que era una depuración de las pocas manzanas buenas que quedaban en la policía, ¿verdad? Entonces, puede irse por los dos lados, depende y esta es una posición en la cual existen una posición confrontada. Y la segunda pregunta es, se especula, bueno, ya no se especula, es algo muy abierto, que se habla sobre el voto a los miembros de la policía y a los militares que ejerzan el sufragio, perdón. ¿Cuál es la posición en este caso de la organización de la sociedad civil ante este tema, considerando que se percibe un estado de militarización, de un exceso de policía? Y usted mencionó que creo que dijo cuántos eran, 16,000 empleos, ¿verdad? Pero suena bien, pero también son muchos empleos, digamos, para una sola, en este caso dependan de un solo del Estado, y digamos, la intención de la ley era de que justamente en momentos tan delicados como los que está viviendo el país, alguien como la policía o los militares fueran quienes guardaran un justo balance, y cómo el tema del voto puede cambiar o perjudicar esto. Gracias.
Gracias. Había una colega aquí, eso. Y después, les pido que sean breves, por favor, porque tenemos apenas unos 10 minutos para las respuestas.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Maripaz Álvarez. Bueno, 2 preguntas muy rápidas. La primera es, me preguntaba cómo fue el proceso para volver a llenar estos puestos que fueron, eso de la gente que despidieron o que se fueron de sus puestos, y si hay algún proceso para estar seguros que se van a ser responsables a lo largo del tiempo que van a estar ahí. Y al mismo tiempo, ¿cuáles son los retos que ven para el futuro al estar, como dice, falta mucho tiempo para que se pueda regenerar o mejorar todo este sistema, pero cuáles son los retos que ven probablemente dentro de los próximos 10 años y cómo piensan pues ir hacia eso? Perdón. Gracias.
Gracias. Who wants to go first? ¿Quién quiere ir primero?
Sí. Bueno, yo no estoy de acuerdo con que los policías en esta coyuntura voten. O sea, el debate me parece que contamina más bien lo que Honduras está viviendo. O sea, no sé en qué se sustentará quien proponga esto, pero por lo menos yo en lo particular no puedo hablar de la organización que represento porque no tiene un posicionamiento, y mucho menos de la comisión. En este momento, un debate de ese tipo sería instrumentalizado y la policía sería afectado igual que el proceso. Así que no me parece oportuno. Además, tendría que hacerse una revisión integral del marco electoral, político electoral, que le asigna funciones a la Fuerza Armada y a la policía en materia electoral, y una vez reformado ese sistema y bajada la crispación, creo que este tema podría ser sujeto a discusión. Métrica, no existe un elemento concreto que pueda determinar si la depuración funcionó o no, pero le doy 4 datos importantes. Uno que tiene que ver con un informe del Instituto Universitario de Paz, Seguridad y Democracia, IUTPA, de la universidad, que establecen que la tasa de homicidio en los últimos años, precisamente coincidente con el proceso de depuración, ha bajado sustancialmente. En los últimos 4 años hemos bajado de 86 homicidios por cada 100.000 habitantes a 40 homicidios por cada 100.000 habitantes, según la universidad. Un estudio de ASJ presentado recientemente establece que en los últimos años ha existido una reducción de la tasa de impunidad en homicidios de 94 homicidios por cada 100.000 habitantes a 87 homicidios por cada 100.000 habitantes. Distintos sondeos elaborados por la Iglesia, elaborados por empresas privadas, establecen que la policía pasó de 19% de confianza de la población hace 4 años a 52% el año pasado. Hay un incremento en la conciencia, o sea, la mitad de la población no confía en la policía. 80% no confiaba hace 4 años. Son tal vez algunos elementos que indican que la policía está contribuyendo a algunos aspectos que creo que son positivos. Ahora, la pregunta sobre cómo se sustituye con el acompañamiento de la Agencia Suiza de Cooperación Internacional, con el acompañamiento de IANL, que es una agencia antinarcóticos y de apoyo a aquellas instituciones que aplican la ley, que es dependencia del Departamento de Estado, y con el apoyo financiero del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, se rediseñó el sistema de educación básico policial, el Instituto Tecnológico Policial, más o menos unos $18 millones, modificando la currícula o el programa de formación, sustituyendo totalmente el staff de docentes, mejorando su infraestructura y apostándole a una formación en el policía. Tiene enfoque comunitario, de proximidad, respetuoso de derechos humanos. En los últimos 4 años, 7.500 policías han sido, 8.000 policías han sido incorporados al servicio público y han surgido precisamente de ese nuevo modelo que fue financiado por la cooperación internacional y que es pues una esperanza para nosotros en términos de que mejore y que esta sangre nueva resuelva los viejos problemas que hay dentro de la policía. Sobre los retos, para mí lo más importante es garantizar que los hondureños seguiremos teniendo el dedo sobre la llaga, es decir, que el interés por la reforma policial sea mayúsculo, que los recursos a disposición sean sostenibles y que exista un nuevo liderazgo. Yo creo que aquí es fundamental determinar que el liderazgo político de la Secretaría de Seguridad y el liderazgo policial es fundamental garantizar que se renueve en los próximos años, es decir, que se garantice tener estabilidad, una conducción despolitizada y con mucho talento al frente de las huestes policiales.
Quiero responder un poco a la inquietud del compañero que preguntó sobre métricas. Una de las cosas más frustrantes en realidad es la falta de este tipo de datos. Hay cosas muy gruesas que están disponibles, por ejemplo, las mediciones que hace la Universidad de Vanderbilt en sus famosas encuestas de cultura política cada 2 años, en la serie de la POP, en que normalmente preguntan a la gente qué grado de confianza tiene la policía, etcétera, etcétera. Ese indicador es muy grueso, pero ha ido mejorando en el punto más álgido de la crisis en el 2012. Es decir, la policía hondureña estaba en el último lugar en todo el hemisferio en ese sentido. Tenía un 28% de aprobación. Eso había subido incluso antes de la depuración a un nivel más decente de un 45. Yo creo que está por ahí actualmente. Pero en general comparto la percepción de Omar de que no hay mucho que ofrecer en ese sentido. Es una laguna estadística que es difícil de llenar. Sí sé que en el Ministerio de Seguridad ha hecho sus encuestas propias, ¿no?, sobre estas variables y llegan a datos que son un poco más, digamos, halagadores para ellos. En este contexto, quiero un poco enfocar la parte del comentario, ¿no?, donde usted habla de su percepción, que es una percepción no solamente suya, sino de mucha gente, de que, o sea, el comportamiento práctico de la policía hoy en día reformada es incluso peor que antes de la depuración. El problema es que puede haber mucho de ese objetivo en esto. Pero también es evidente que los esfuerzos por cambiar la percepción de la gente a nivel local han sido limitados. Es decir, la Policía Nacional tiene lo que llaman el modelo catracho, el modelo de policía comunitaria, que es algo que es un compromiso real, pero no se ha profundizado muchísimo. Uno de los datos de una de esas encuestas del ministerio indican que los residentes en los barrios de Tegucigalpa, como 5% saben quién es el jefe de patrullas en su vecindario. ¿Okay? Y eso es un dato preocupante si el objetivo es acercar la policía, digamos, a la población. Ahora, tú hablas con gente de la INL, que está a cargo de la difusión de este modelo, y te dicen, pues puede ser, pero puede ser también porque hay una política de rotación dentro de la Policía Nacional que impide que un patrullero quede mucho tiempo en un mismo lugar. O sea, lo ideal en un sistema de policía comunitaria es que se asigne a un policía por lo menos 2 años en un lugar específico. Eso es algo difícil, o sea, por las mismas carencias de personal, en parte creadas por la depuración, es difícil todavía. Lo que yo, por lo menos le puedo asegurar de mi experiencia, y tengo convicción de que se está haciendo un esfuerzo importante para replicar este modelo. No es, hay ciertos datos propios de estas unidades que me han dado, pero francamente no sé sacar conclusiones muy contundentes de ellas. Pero el problema también es que estos proyectos, o sea, comenzaron como proyectos pilotos en San Pedro Sula, luego se están difundiendo paulatinamente al resto del país y van a necesitar años para que tengan un efecto muy sensible en la población. Pero mi impresión, no habiendo hecho un estudio concreto, es que se está tratando de hacer el esfuerzo. De manera que en el marco de ese esfuerzo, me cuesta creer un poco de que si se hiciera realmente un esfuerzo serio para investigar este tema, de que se llegaría a la conclusión de que la mayoría de la población realmente percibe que a nivel de sus barrios que la policía actual es peor que la policía anterior. O sea, la policía en el 2011-2012 era una policía francamente criminal. O sea, una policía a la cual la gente huía, que ni siquiera se podía hablar con ellos. O sea, la gente sentía de que no había ninguna autoridad del Estado a la cual se podría recurrir contra abusos de la policía, que eran frecuentes, que eran violentos. Entonces, me cuesta creer de que en el lapso de estos 6 años, antes y después de la depuración, que absolutamente nada ha cambiado en ese comportamiento concreto. Pero tengo que admitir que evidencia empírica concreta para demostrarlo todavía no hay.
Thank you. Unfortunately, just to keep on schedule, I'm going to have to finalize the panel. Thank you, David. Gracias, Omar. And I don't know what the logistics
Yeah,
are.
just thank you all very much for the panel. We should